Did you hit record? Hi, everyone. This is Jeanette Sheliga with VGA, and right now I'm going to be presenting to you on my current obsession, which are WPA inventories. So my first encounter with the Works Progress Administration, which was later the Works Projects Administration, was at my local society's library, where I found this binder that was just simply titled List of Niagara County Churches. And so I opened it up and it showed that there were dates when the churches were established and books and like what books they had baptisms and marriages, etc. And so to show you what that looks like, this is one of the pages from that book. And so it was organized for the churches, I assumed, of New York State, because it had Niagara County and page number 36, and and then it had Lockport, and then if I turn the pages, it was a different town or city in my area. And then it was arranged by what denomination the churches were, so it had all the Protestant Episcopal churches for Lockport in one area. Then it had all the Roman Catholic churches. And I thought this was cool, but I had no idea what I was looking at because the binder in the society's library didn't even have the cover page of where they got that information from. So I asked around and I learned that it was from the WPA, where they had in 1942 published a guide to vital statistic records of churches in New York State, which did not include New York City. And it was a 2-volume set. And you can find full copies of exactly what I'm showing you for free on NYGMB's website, which is the New York Genealogical and Biographical Society, and on Family Search. So I was curious to learn more about this, and I kept asking questions, and I kept watching any WPA webinar I could find and reading articles on the subject. And I learned about the different projects that the WPA had, such as the Federal Writers Project and the Historical Records Survey, among a whole bunch of other different projects that they conducted throughout the United States. It was the Historical Records Survey project that was the one that created this church inventory that I had found at my local society's library. And the Historical Records Survey's mission was to identify, collect, and conserve United States' historical records. And many different states had published guides equivalent to the New York State one that I had. And you can see some results here that I found on Family Search. The first one was a guide to church vital statistic records in California. And then I also found one for North Dakota. Now, when I was in the Family Search catalog, I clicked on the one for California, and that one had been digitized by Family Search, and you can go and read it right now. For the North Dakota one, Family Search has not yet digitized that one. However, now that I know that it exists, I could then search around and see perhaps if other websites have it online, such as archive.org, HathiTrust, or Google Books. So it's a great way of utilizing the Family Search catalog to learn what's out there. And just as a side note, though the titles may be very similar to the one that I was looking at in New York, each WPA publication might be slightly different and contain different information than each other for the various states. To find available WPA church inventories like the one that I found, you can do a search in the Family Search catalog under author and put in Historical Records Survey as the author. And by doing so, you can then find that they have numerous hits for all the states in the United States of different inventories and guides that they had published, not just church ones, but many different historical records surveys that were published. So to take a look at an example of the one that was from my county in Niagara County, New York, This was organized, as I said, by county, and then the place, in this case, Barker, and then the denomination being Methodist. And it mentioned some basic information about the church, when it was established, and then a little bit about the records that they had available there, which included 2 volumes of baptisms, deaths, and marriages, and members beginning in 1904. So, as I said, I was curious about the historical records survey, and I learned that the New York State Archives had some WPA material there. And I did a search on their catalog and found out that they had 6 boxes of WPA Historical Records Survey inventory of church records. So, what does any other obsessed genealogist do? But I drove 4 hours on my day off from work to go take a look inside that box, right? Like, of course I would. And so, what I found was, for the folder that included my county, for every church inventory in that folder, the WPA worker had stapled a page of notes that they had taken, and then there was a typed form that included a front and a back. Most of the information that I found on the handwritten notes was included in the typed information of the final product of the form, that had, as I said, a front and back. But still, there could be some other information that they had not included on the typed form. So I was glad that the handwritten notes were still attached to the form. The form itself included a total of 17 questions. So let's delve into it. At the top, it included the WPA worker's name, and then just kind of the place that this was taken place. And this was the church records form, and it was in New York, for the historical records survey. You can see the date that the person had turned it in, or when they completed it, being April 12th of 1938. Question 1 dealt with where. It was in Niagara County, and it was the town of Somerset, the village of Barker. Question 2 was the name of the church, this being the Community Methodist Episcopal Church, and the street address of the church. Question 3 was the church's denomination, and then also when the church itself was organized, in this case, January 31st, 1893. They even included some information about the current pastor that was there, when they started, where they got their education. And then question 4 was a spot for the worker to put if that church was no longer in existence. Question 5 on the form was to allow information for other buildings. And in this case, there was a frame parsonage that was built next to the church in 1895, and an addition to the church in 1910. Question 6 was about when was the present church dedicated. And in this case, it was January 28th, 1894, almost a year to the date of when the church established. I wonder if they had some sort of celebratory, ribbon cutting for the church, like, hey, we've been here a year and here's our new church that we've opened. And then they talked about that there was extensive repairs in 1910 to the church. Question 7 was a spot for them to indicate architectural and special features of the church. In this case, there was a frame rectangular hall with a bell tower that had 1 bell. The altar and pews were of natural oak, stained glass windows, and no inscriptions. I can, kind of see if this was one of the churches that my ancestors attended. I'm starting to get a picture of what it looked like. Towards the bottom of the front of the form, it talked about the first clergyman that helped to establish the church. So it's the name of the pastor, the dates in which that pastor was there, and then if they were familiar with the educational background of that pastor. Question 9 and 10 are probably going to perk some genealogist ears, because this is where the WPA worker indicated what books, what records that church held. In this case, the church held minute books starting in 1904, that they had 2 volumes. And then there's 2 Abbreviations. The U stood for that was unindexed, and then the G meant that those volumes were in good condition. The minute books were held at the parsonage and kept by the church's secretary. They were handwritten and included financial records. Then question 10 talked about all those vital events that we love to look up in genealogical records for churches, which included the baptisms, confirmations, marriages, member lists, and deaths. In this case, there was also 2 church register books beginning in 1904. There were 2 volumes. They were unindexed in good condition. They were also kept at the parsonage in 1938 by the pastor. They were handwritten, and it kept baptism, marriages, members, and deaths, but not confirmations, according to the form, which probably has to do with the religion that they were dealing with. On the back of the form, question 11 was, were there any, excuse me, record books of Sunday school or other organizations? In this case, this Methodist Episcopal Church had a Sunday school, a ladies' aid society, a ladies' missionary society, and a young people's society. And again, I can start to envision what was maybe available to an ancestor that I was researching if they happened to go to this church, if they were a member of this church. Question 12 indicated if there were financial records, books kept, and in this case, they were kept in the church minute books. And then question 13 and 14, the WPA worker was to indicate if there were any unpublished or published histories about the church. In this particular case, there was none, but I wanted to show you an example of a different church that did include some indication of published histories, in which you can see how detailed the WPA worker was to include the publisher, the author, the name of the article, the name of the book, how many pages the book was, and even down to what library you could find that book in. Back to our Methodist Episcopal Church, it included a spot for question 15 of any other records. In this case, there were none. That the records in question 16 that they found were in good condition. And then question 17 was much of what was included on the front handwritten page about the church was the church's history per the WPA worker. And to read that to you, it says the Methodist Episcopal Church at Somerset was the nearest church to Barker, and as the population was increasing, it was felt that services should be held at Barker. In 1891, the Reverend J.O. Hazelton, pastor of the Somerset Church, preached in Lum's Hall Sunday afternoons. Later, a Sabbath school was started. Interest lagged until the Reverend Joseph Morrow became pastor of the Somerset Church in 1893. He called a public meeting which was held in the schoolhouse January 31st, 1893. On November 27th, 1893, the society was incorporated. They made arrangements to build the church at the first meeting. Isn't that wonderful information that was found on this one church in this one inventory? And I want to take you back now to a second to think about all that we learned from those few sheets of paper to then what was it reduced to for the final publication of the vital statistics for the church records of New York State. This is that same church that we looked at. And we can see, pulling out some of the data, the name of the church was there, the year it was established, but not the date it was established. It did have the address of the church, and it included that there was 2 volumes of the baptisms, deaths, marriages, and members, but it didn't include the information about what different societies the group had or the minute books, so it would be good of you to, if you're crazy like me, to drive a little bit or, make a research trip to see if you can find some of these original inventories to find out what information might be available. Because I'm becoming obsessed. This is just one box I looked at of many. And this is just one example of a church archive, or church survey form that was done. There's ones that were done for county clerk's offices, town clerk's offices, county courts, all these different things, boards of supervisors, treasurers, coroners. They inventoried all the places that they could find. So to kind of wrap up a little bit, the WPA ended before they were really able to complete and publish all of the projects that they started. And this was mainly due to World War II. And with the end of the WPA program, these records from the Historical Records Survey were either dispersed or in some cases destroyed. In my case, I was able to find them at the State Archive. The Society of American Archivists kind of wanted to find out what happened to all of these records. And so what they did is they tracked down in the 1970s and published a book in 1980 that you can see here, where they really kind of focused on what happened to the things that the WPA did that were unpublished. So this is the WPA Historical Records Survey, a guide to the unpublished inventories, indexes, and transcripts. And this is available for free on Family Search and HathiTrust. In it, at the beginning, they talk about their process, how they reached out to all these different historical societies and libraries saying, hey, do any of you know what happened to the WPA papers when it ended in the 1940s? And then after the beginning section, they kind of go through each state of the United States and talk about in a description at the beginning, a breakdown of what they found out that happened to these inventories. For the New York State one, because that's where I am, searching, it talked about how that when the WPA, the Historical Records Survey project was terminated, that the unpublished materials were transferred to the New York State Library. But then later in 1977, the New York State Library transferred them to the New York State Archives. But they also included that when the Historical Records Survey closed its regional offices in 1942, that they transferred portions of their files to several different local historical societies and libraries throughout the state and then listed them. And I found in this 1980 book that instead of me having to drive 4 hours away to the state archives, that there was a regional library that they still had some of these records available that was in only 35 minutes away from me in Buffalo. So of course, I had another day off from work, right? I had to go check them out. And so I found that these were carbon copies of the records that I had looked at, the original ones in Albany. And so they didn't have the church ones there, but they did have copies of the village and county clerk's records that I had looked at in Albany. And so you can see here, this is a copy of a village clerk's office where they were inventorying. And on the left is the one that I took a picture of with my phone at the State Archives in Albany. And then the one on the right was an exact copy of it, just a carbon copy. So it's a little bit fuzzier of that same record that was only at a regional historical museum that's a half hour away from me. And this was particularly eye-opening to learn that this local village started keeping vital statistics, that they had 3 volumes beginning in 1868, whereas New York State didn't start requiring vital events until 1880 and didn't get full compliance until like 1913, 1914. So now that I know that the village clerk, at least when they, the WPA came around in the 1930s and 40s, that they had these 3 volumes that included all of the records of births and deaths in the village of Youngstown. And if I had an ancestor that lived there, I would sure want to contact that clerk and be like, hey, do you still have this? Because I'd love to take a look at it. If you're curious to learn more about some of these different WPA historical records survey, encourage you to go to our VGA YouTube channel, because Bryna O'Sullivan, that we heard earlier today, did one about the historical house surveys that the WPA did, and you can watch that for free on our YouTube channel. So I hope that you guys are also a little bit curious now and perhaps obsessed to go find some of these WPA historical records surveys and see if you can find the originals, even if it was published, to see what other information you can glean from that. Or if it was unpublished, then to find it and perhaps then take those records and help to publish what the WPA didn't have a chance to finish back in the 1940s, so that other genealogists and future generations can find out what they had. So I thank you for the time, and have a great rest of your day.